Hi friends, as you can see from the sign, I'm here at the Pioneer Cemetery that was founded in 1852 in Watsonville, California. Watsonville is located in Santa Cruz County. It's just a short distance from the beach, and it's about 100 miles south of San Francisco. I'm here to visit the gravesite of folk hero and cowboy Charley Parkhurst. Now, what makes Charley so interesting is that Charley was actually a woman, but she spent her entire adult life living as a man, dressing as a man, working as a man, and no one was the wiser until she died. Charley is also believed to be the very first woman in the U.S. to cast a vote. She was a member of the all-male Independent Order of Oddfellows, and in 1868 she cast a vote as a man, but of course she was actually a woman. And this was more than 50 years before women won the right to vote. And since we're just a couple of days away from the 2018 elections, I thought this would be a perfect time to share Charley's story with you. And so I came here to see the gravesite of Charley Parkhurst, and I'd never been up here before, so I called ahead of time to ask how to find the grave and to ask, for the hours of the cemetery and everything. The woman I spoke to was really nice, and she was very happy to help me. She says people come and visit Charley's gravestone all the time, and so she gave me directions. She said, if you try to find it on your own, you'll probably never find it unless you're here all day. It's not a huge cemetery. It's probably a small to medium size, but there are an awful lot of graves, a lot of headstones, and so it's hard to distinguish one headstone from another if you don't know where to look. So I'm going to show you how to find the grave. I've seen a few people visit this cemetery before, but no, most people just stand here and show you the historical marker, but I've never seen anybody drive through or walk through the cemetery to show you how to find it. So I'm going to do that in case you'd like to visit. So the reason I'm here today is because I thought this was a really interesting gravesite. You don't see a lot of these. In fact, this is the first one I've ever seen. I have actually seen movies where women in the pioneer days, in the Old West, back in the 1800s, where they dressed as men and lived as men to survive. And there's a movie that Glenn Close is in. I forget the name of it right now. I'll put a picture of it. I'll put a picture of the movie up on screen. She spent her life also, I believe it was over in England or Ireland, and she spent her life living as a man. Now, there's many reasons women did that. I don't know if Charley was transgender back then. I'm sure the term didn't even exist, but she could have been trans, or she could have just decided that being a man came with a lot more privileges. So you can see that she was a noted whip of the Gold Rush days. She drove a stagecoach over Mount Madonna in the early days of Valley. They've really abbreviated this, of the Valley. Last run, San Juan to Santa Cruz. She died in a cabin near the 7 Mile High house. Not sure where that is. Revealed One-Eyed Charley. Okay, reading this, it gives you like the brief info, but basically, no one knew that she was a woman until she died. She lived her entire life as a man, dressed as a man, acted like a man. Didn't say much. She was called Silent Charley as well, and I think probably because she didn't want to give herself away with her, maybe she had a higher voice or something. So she didn't speak much during an incident earlier in life when I believe she was working with horses and had an accident that took out one of her eyes. So she was called One-Eyed Charley or Silent Charley. And only after she died did the coroner, while I guess he was preparing her for burial, discover that he was really a she. Up until then, no one knew that. Now, I have heard of, I think, at least 1 or 2 women who dressed as men to fight in the Civil War And I know there's a movie about a woman who lived in the pioneer days in the Midwest. Might have been Wyoming or Montana. I'll see if I can find that movie and put that up as well. So, you know, half a dozen in history that I'm aware of, women who dressed as men and acted as men and had male jobs at the time, and no one was the wiser. No one knew until they died. Now, I don't know if some of these women maybe were lesbians or trans, or they may just have not wanted to deal with the inequities of being a woman. We're in 2018 right now, and women are still fighting for equal pay, equal treatment, fighting not to be abused by men, or at least some men. So if this is making daily headline news here in the US in 2018, imagine what it must have been like being a woman back in 1812. She lived quite a long life, and she drove a stagecoach. You know, the other thing that I find really interesting about Charley Parkhurst's gravesite or grave marker is that this was erected in 1955 by the Historical Association here in the city, or in the valley. I guess it's, I don't know if it's Pajaro or Payarho Valley Historical Association. Well, in 1955, there was still a lot of prejudice against LGBT people, trans people, lesbians. So my guess is for them to recognize her as a woman who dressed in men's clothing, they weren't thinking of it as in a sexual way at all. It was purely a way for her to survive. I'm sure that had to be what they were thinking. Well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, I'm guessing. But anyway, I think it's pretty cool that this has been here erected since 1955. That's more than 60 years ago. So anyway, let's go take a look. This is such a beautiful cemetery. I had no idea. When, again, like I was saying, I've seen a few other people visit this grave, but whenever they do, they only show the grave, so I've never seen anything else. I just assumed it was a dirt lot somewhere, because you can see this, there's a little bit of grass now, but you know, there's not really much to it, and this is all I've ever seen, so I had no idea that there are all these really incredible mausoleums and interesting headstones. So let's go take a look around, see if we can find anyone else who's really interesting, and then I'll also show you how to find this grave from the front gate. And I have to do a shout out, thank you, to the woman, I didn't get her name, unfortunately, the woman who works in the office, who gave me detailed instructions on how to find this grave. And I really appreciate it, because I never would have found it. She was right. I never would have found it on my own. Well, I shouldn't say never, but after an hour or two, I probably would have given up and decided to come back another time. Now, right behind me here, this street is called Freedom Street. There's a shopping center right across the street, and you can see the sign to the cemetery. Well, you can't really see it from here, but it's right behind my car there. So if you can at least make it that far, you can come over here to this white mausoleum. It's Cox, C-O-X. It's the Cox family mausoleum, and Charley Parkhurst is just right behind. So even though the cemetery sign that I just showed you earlier is located on Freedom Boulevard, you don't enter the cemetery on Freedom Boulevard. You go around to the side street, and you can see from the sign, it's 66 Marin Street, and that's where you enter. You'll notice that it's in a residential neighborhood. So you'll head to the end of the street, make a right-hand turn, and head up the hill. At the end of the street on the right-hand side is the office. So once you go through the gate, you make a right, you head up the hill. It's the only street here, it's easy to find. And once you get almost to the top of the hill, the street right before the very last one, you make a left. And as the woman on the phone told me, there's only one street where you can make a left. So then once you make a left, you go up the hill to the 4th Street, and it's right past the 4th Street on the right hand side, right behind the white mausoleum that says Cox. So it's pretty easy to find. So the gate straight ahead goes out into the busy street, which is Liberty, but I don't think it's open. And this is the only street here you can make a left-hand turn on. And then if you look over there on the right, all the way down at the end, with that near the very large cypress tree, is the white mausoleum. So it's just right behind that. You can see the market across the street. So it's pretty easy to find if you know where you're going. But if you don't, as the woman said to me, a very difficult time finding it. So here's a look at some of the other mausoleums and headstones scattered around this small but very historic cemetery. If you're into history, you could probably spend all day here. Now this one here looks a little bit more like a jail, a miniature prison, although it is really pretty. It's made of brick and just painted white, and the gate gives it the look of a jail cell. This mausoleum is especially impressive. And this one looks a lot older than some of the others. There's really a lot of variety here as far as the types of graves. And it's kind of funny to see this big shopping center right behind the gravestones of some of these very historic graves. So what do you think about Charleys Life? Can you imagine what it must have been like to be a woman back in the early 1800s? And have any of you visited Charleys Grave? How about any of the other women who dressed as men and either lived their life that way or dressed that way to become soldiers in the Civil War? So I've done a little research and I found out that Albert Cashier was a woman who became a soldier in the Civil War, and she's buried in Illinois. Sarah Emma Edmonds was a Civil War spy who dressed as a man to spy, and she's buried in Texas. And Sarah Rosetta Wakeman was also a Civil War soldier, and she's buried in Louisiana. Have any of you visited any of their graves? If I ever travel to any of those states in the future, I'll definitely stop by and visit their graves. Of course, now this makes me wonder if there were any men in history who dressed as women and pretended to be women and weren't discovered until after they died. Do any of you know of any? I Googled it and couldn't find anyone, since so many women seem to have done it. You would think there must be at least a few guys who did just the opposite. What do you think? If any of you know, please let me know so I can visit their grave sites. So if you enjoyed today's trip to the cemetery, please give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll hope to see you next time.